Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Wednesday morning. I feel like, I think last week you said it felt like a slow news week. Um, we just had a January 6th session yesterday. So do you still feel like things are on the slow side, or do you feel freshly unsettled about the state of American democracy?
Well, look, I think that when I said it was a slow news week, I think that's because my outrage receptors have been burnt out years ago because of the Trump administration. So it's hard to judge what constitutes as a slow news week now compared to past weeks. It does
Well, I
feel it does feel a little slow to me, even though I think again we continue to learn new things but how long can you be outraged? It's hard to stay in perpetual outrage about something that happened a long time ago, even if you follow it closely, and even if it's you're reminded of how despicable it was.
mean, my sense of you, Matt, and correct me if I'm wrong here. I think you are more focused on the January 6th commission than the average voter and the average Republican voter.
Oh, I think that's fair to say. Um, but I do think it matters. I don't necessarily think that average voters are sitting around watching the hearings, but I think that they're getting some of the overspill of it popping up on social media and other places. So I actually think it has made a difference, not just for history. I think that's an important part of this, right? But I think it has made a difference, and I think that it has contributed to the erosion of support for Donald Trump. Just the sense that, oh, yeah, I love Trump, but it's time to move on. That's the way. If Trump is to be beaten by Republicans, that's the way it happens. And I think that the January 6th committee has contributed to that.
I want to pull on that thread, but I just want to ask you one other thing about you.
Well, I'll
So
talk about
like,
me all day. I'm
so
like
right
Toby Keith
now,
when it comes to talking about me.
so right now in the Matt and Lewis daily news diet, like what subjects do you find yourself tracking the most closely? Like top three things. Is January 6th one of the top three things?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think so. For me, I think if you were to go look at like my Daily Beast oeuvre, the catalog that I've written about, I think that it's been a lot of it's still a lot about the Republican Party, Ron DeSantis versus Trump. Can the Republican Party move on from Trump? I think it's a lot about Dems in disarray and Biden. I'll include Biden there, Biden's problems. And then I think the other third is still January 6th and Donald Trump and the alt. I'll lump in the alt right and MAGA and all of that. So yeah, this is a big part of my uh, information pyramid. it's 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 one of the foundational things that I'm looking at. I think it's very important.
So we're seeing more and more evidence that DeSantis is threatening Trump's dominance in the Republican Party. Yeah, it's not DeSantis' party yet. It's still, if the election was today, Donald Trump probably still be the Republican nominee. Um, we still have evidence that he can make waves in Republican primaries. Maybe he can't dictate them all, but we he definitely got JD Vance over the finish line. He got Dr. Oz over the finish line. These were crowded fields where he didn't have to. The winner did not need 50% of the vote, but they definitely moved up after that endorsement. And this might also help Blake Masters in Arizona in that Senate primary, which comes up in a few weeks. But we're seeing DeSantis be clearly, you look at 2024 polling, there's a top tier of Trump and DeSantis and everybody else. Um, uh, so is your interpretation, Matt, that your average DeSantis voter, your DeSantis voter is not a John Huntsman voter, it's not a Mitt Romney voter, um, people that still want a candidate that uh, is a norm buster, drives liberals crazy, drives the media crazy, takes no guff, but has the benefit of being a fresh face who doesn't have to relitigate 2020 all the time. Is that your
That's
sense
pretty
of?
much exactly it. There was recently, I think yesterday, a poll that showed that Trump is below 50% among Republicans, or more than 50% of Republicans want someone else. Did you see that, Bill?
Well, I think that was the Times poll.
Okay.
I feel that wording of it, which is from the article, I think it's a little stronger than I think the poll suggested. I don't think it was a binary question. It was, who do you want to be the nominee? And Trump was like 49% or something like that, and DeSantis was in the 20s. So it doesn't mean that some of those other people wouldn't come around to Trump, depending on how the horse race was shaking out.
Yeah, and I mean, last time Trump won with a plurality, right? So
Right.
Trump doesn't necessarily need to have a majority to win, but I do think that this is showing some cracks in his support, some erosion. And look, my theory is that the only way to beat Trump is to have a coalition that includes Trumpy people, Trump supporters who just think it's time to go with someone younger who's also a fighter, and B, sort of like Reagan Romney type voters, more mainstream, traditional Republican. I won't call them establishment uh, because these labels mean different things. But I don't think you can beat Trump unless you have this coalition that includes former Trump supporters and people who are very Trumpy, more Trumpy than I am, much more Trumpy than I am, and people like me. And I think that if you had that coalition, you would have a chance to take down Trump. And I think the only if this is like a Venn diagram and you're looking at like which candidate out there could possibly put together this coalition, I think it's Ron DeSantis. Um, I think
Well,
I think DeSantis should run because this is a moment he's having, and 4 years from now or 6 years from now, I think it's highly unlikely that he'll be having the same moment. Someone else will have a moment then, probably. And I think, though, the question is, I do believe that I think there's a scenario where DeSantis starts to run and takes off. And I think there's a scenario where he starts to run and he becomes, I don't know, Scott Walker or Rick Perry. Okay. And then that's the unknown. That's what we don't know.
what I think DeSantis is doing right, and Trump is somewhat surprisingly doing wrong, uh, is DeSantis, I think, gets the mentality of this Republican base voter who is kind of always looking for the next fight, uh, either because they're proactively pushing on a new frontier or reacting to something that is happening on the left that is making them upset. Um, so DeSantis is picking fresh fights. It's masking. It's Disney. It's vaccines. Um, he's always on the front edge of what's in the news or making the news. And Trump is someone who did that in the 2016 campaign, and Obama did that as president. I mean, Trump as president was a guy who couldn't sit still, couldn't ride a little pole bump, couldn't hang back and let the tax cut bill sink in. Like, he had to have some fresh controversy all the time. And so on one hand, that attitude of Trump's served him well enough in 2016 because he was always the driver of news, always center of attention. Didn't help him out so much as president because people got sick of it.
Well,
Was one
I think it's a
case,
double. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it did help
right?
him. It also hurt him. But look, he's not the
But
president.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
not.
But that's why I finished
DeSantis is
one.
actually a governor. Trump doesn't have Twitter anymore, and he had a
Yes, it's
rally
easier
in
for DeSantis.
Anchorage. He had a rally in Anchorage you probably didn't even hear about. You know what I mean? So
Well, I mean, also because Trump is so committed because he's such a narcissist. Um, he can't let go of the argument they didn't actually win. And so I think that is tugging against his other natural inclination, which is to make news and drive controversies. So he's sort of stuck with this, with this dead weight of 2020 that DeSantis isn't. Um, so I think that's why DeSantis is, frankly, doing a little bit better than I would have thought. Because part of my attitude 6 months ago was, if you're DeSantis, how do you argue um, you should replace Trump, the guy you love
Yeah.
so much? Uh, Now, the one thing I think we don't know yet in terms of how an actual primary would go between the two of them is, does DeSantis have the wherewithal and the strategy to overcome whatever scurrilous nastiness comes from Trump to him? One thing Trump was exceptionally good at in 2016 was tearing down other candidates, finding their soft spot, coming up with some nickname, and just mercilessly hammering them and turning them into a puddle of mush. And DeSantis has never had to deal with that. So that I something that can be known until the fight is really
Yeah.
joined.
I agree. I agree with that. We don't know. And it's like a boxer or a football player, right? I mean, man, they can look real talented, but do they have a glass jaw? Can they take a punch? And we don't really know how DeSantis will perform at that level. However, I will say this. I think that the advantage DeSantis has over everybody else who ran against Trump, including Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and you go down the list. I think that DeSantis is authentically a jerk. I think and don't get me wrong, Ted Cruz is a jerk in his own way too. But DeSantis is that sort of macho, asshole, jerk, egomaniac. And in a lot of ways, that's not good, obviously, right? This means, for example, DeSantis can't keep staff. People keep leaving him. And I think being the way that he is, well, look at what happened to Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is a cautionary tale on what happens when you think you can do no wrong and you don't listen to anybody. But there's an advantage to it. And I think when you're going up against Donald Trump, I think that DeSantis's like natural ego and jerkitude, I don't know what to call it, insulates him, makes him. I think he will fare much better, much better than Donald Trump. And then maybe the contrast is, you know, it's not who's tougher, who's going to be a better fighter. It's like, okay, these are two bulls that we've put in a ring together, but like, which one's younger? Donald Trump, if I were DeSantis, I would tell people, look, Donald Trump was a great president. He served 4 years, but guess what? We need 8 more years. I can serve for 8. Trump can only serve 4 more. This is a guy who's, you talk about him being a loser. You can talk about him dwelling on the past. And I think just implicitly, he's old. And so we Americans, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but we have a bias toward new. We're fickle. We have a bias toward youth. We fetishize youth. Like, make that work for you, Ron DeSantis.
I mean, that's probably a solid, something in the tool of arguments he can make. But I think your point about him being a jerk like Cruz, like I like, this might be the fact that I'm not a Republican, but like, I don't see DeSantis as some sort of inherently likable guy. This is not the "do you want to have a beer with" guy.
No,
I
that's
think
not what the
there's a
Republican
smart. I
Party
mean,
wants, Bill. The Republican Party.
well, but Trump was more interesting. I mean, Trump was obviously a massive lout, but there was a certain cheekiness to him, uh, a bit of a wink and a nod element to him
Yeah.
that by
I
beach.
mean, he could be a stand-up comedian. You know, his
Yeah,
I get
yeah,
that.
like Cruz and DeSantis feel like people who wish they could be stand-up comedians and know they can't, and that's what they got into politics. Um,
I think
so I just don't know how well.
I agree with you that neither of them have the I hate to use the word charm, but the humorous side that Trump has. I agree, but that's not what destroyed Republicans. It wasn't that Trump was like funnier than them or more likable than them. Although I think that helped him to a certain degree. He was certainly there were people in the Republican base who found Trump charming and funny and all that. But I think it was the intimidation. And so to me, Ted Cruz, and look, I'm not saying like let me just put my cards on the table here. I'm not saying I'm like the most intimidating alpha man, alpha dog out there
Mhm.
either. Okay, but I'm just saying like I think that like Ted Cruz, if you're just sizing him up, there's like a nerd underneath. There's a nerd in there, you know. There's like a little
But I
kid
guess,
nerd.
but it's true about DeSantis too.
I don't think so. I think DeSantis, man, has got those like Vladimir Putin steely eyes and just I just think he is kind of a uh I mean I've never met him. Never met the guy.
Mhm.
This is just my watching him on TV like everybody else, but he comes across to me as a very tough, serious egomaniac jerk. And I think that plays well in the Republican Party right now. I think it
Mhm.
actually, I think it neutralizes Trump, and it's just okay. Now, which one's younger? Which one's more relevant? Which one could
Mhm.
serve 8 years instead of 4? That's the theory, anyway.
Mhm. Um, I'm still. I wish we had more Florida data, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think I mentioned this in the past show. Uh, I still think abortion is complicated for DeSantis because he clearly is hesitant to go all in on a flat abortion ban or even a 6 week, quote unquote fetal heartbeat ban um, before his reelection this November. So they're doing they passed the 15-week ban with no rape or incest exception, which is now held up in court. It's not implemented yet. Um, but there's a very conservative Florida Supreme Court now, so I think a lot of people assume, even if it's getting blocked along the way, that and there's plenty of past precedent that it would be unconstitutional under the Florida Constitution, which has an explicit right to privacy. That this Florida Supreme Court, would uphold the 15-week ban. Um, so there's a risk for DeSantis in this election that could spark some kind of backlash with an electorate that's not that socially conservative, and he's vulnerable in 2024 because you're going to have other people saying, "Hey, why didn't you? You're so tough. You say you're so concerned. You don't care about what the liberal secular elites think, and yet you're 93% of abortions are in the first 15 weeks, and you're keeping them legal." Um, Now maybe he's going to pivot and try to ban them after he's reelected. But does that expose him to being political? You only did this to get reelected in your own state. You didn't put babies' lives first. I mean, Trump could try to lay that on him. Trump could say, "Hey, I'm the guy who promised to overturn Roe v. Wade with my judges, and I did it." And then this guy acted politically and didn't put babies' lives first. If Greg Abbott's in the mix, he could say, "Look, I went all in right away. I didn't put my finger to the wind." Christy Noem could say that, or I don't know whether governors might run. So he's walking a very fine line there, and this is the kind of testing that he hasn't been put under. I mean,
Yeah.
he doesn't have a Democratic nominee yet for governor in Florida. They haven't had those one-on-one debates yet because that primary's not till late August, and he's not getting hit on the right either just yet.
I know that the Republican Party recently said that they were not going to participate in the um, debate associate, I forget the name of it, but the sanctioning body that does the 3 general election presidential debates, the Republican Party.
The Commission on Presidential Debates.
That would be it. Okay, thank you, Bill. You should follow me around, just filling in the blanks. A lot of the things that you're talking about are contingent on there being. I mean, there were a lot of Republican primary debates in 2016. Trump didn't come to one of them, but I think he quickly learned that he needed to be there. It really benefited Trump. He did well in those debates. And I do think his humor there really was disarming. I mean, it's sort of a toxic, mean humor, but it really worked.
Well, it's also where he really tore apart the other candidates and store them down, directly.
We're assuming that they're going to be these debates. And I mean, it's obviously in the interest of like Fox News or Newsmax or whoever to host them. But again, I think a lot of our calculations are under the assumption that there will be a bunch of these primary debates. I don't know that there has to be, or that DeSantis has to participate in them necessarily, depending on his strategy and where he's polling.
Well, I mean, if he's supposed to be on a debate stage with Donald Trump and then DeSantis refuses to show, you know what Trump's going to do with that. I mean, even if you can say, well, you duck this debate, Trump's not going to be hamstrung by that kind of hypocrisy. I mean, Trump learned that the ratings are on the debate stage. You get more ratings on the debate stage than off the debate stage. So he stopped the idea of trying to get more eyeballs by having his own rally. That's where you have conflict. That's where you can drop your insult bombs. So I don't think DeSantis can duck those kinds of events.
Yeah, but having 5 debates instead of 20 debates could be the difference. I mean, those were really important for Trump. And, so for what it's worth, I just wanted to throw that out there because I think our assumption is that Trump, what's going to happen when he's on stage with Trump in a debate? That's the real question, right? And you can potentially mitigate that or minimize the damage. But then again, maybe DeSantis needs to go in the lion's den, and maybe the old man's not going to be able to hold up as well as he did, however many years ago. You know what? Let me plug something, Bill, before maybe we can move on and talk Dems a little bit and Biden a little bit. But I want to plug something because after a long hiatus, a very long hiatus, you and I will be doing one of our Zoom conversations exclusively for our patrons, our Patreon supporters, Friday, as of now. I mean, things could fall through, but as of now, Friday afternoon, I'm going to send out an alert hopefully today. But Friday with David Frum is going to come on. I'm probably going to record it for my podcast, but you and I will be peppering him with questions, and then we'll throw it open to the patrons. So it's not too late if you want to, be a patron. You could do it for either me or Bill, right? And they'll have access to that conversation.
Excellent. Looking forward.
Back in the saddle.
Well, let's do talk Democrats because they've been having a week too, and I don't know how closely you were paying attention, Matt, but so over the weekend there was a Washington Post story about how the White House handled the aftermath of the Dobbs decision, and because we know that a lot of progressives were complaining that didn't say the White House had a plan, and they've been hesitant to do the most audacious things. They're not putting abortion clinics on military bases and things like that. And then Biden's communications director puts out a statement to the Washington Post. And let me quote from it directly so I don't screw it up. Apologies for
that's all right.
Delay. But
while you're looking, let me also do another shameless self-promotion. I had Simon Rosenberg on the podcast, who's a center-left, sort of Democratic think tanker and strategist. And he is very bullish, much more bullish on Democrats' chances in the midterms than is conventional wisdom. I would say he's very bullish on Democrats holding the Senate. And so if you're a Democrat and you're looking to be optimistic, if you want some happy talk, check out my conversation with him. And I would say if you're a Republican and you're afraid of being sucked into believing the polls and conventional wisdom that this is all a foregone conclusion, you probably want to listen to that conversation as well.
Well, let's talk about that just a little bit some
Yeah.
more. So this is the Kate Bedingfield, White House Communications Director. The president has been showing his deep outrage as an American and executing his bold plan, which is the product of months of hard work ever since this decision was handed down. Joe Biden's goal in responding to Dobbs is not to satisfy some activists who have been consistently out of step with the mainstream of the Democratic Party. Is to deliver help to women who are in danger and assemble a broad-based coalition to defend a woman's right to choose now, just as he assembled such a coalition to win during the 2020 campaign. So that swipe at activists, really
Yeah.
upset those activists, and led to a fresh round of circular firing squad in social media. And then that's followed with the New York Times poll showing that 2/3 of Democrats don't want Biden to stand for re-election. Um, uh, and so you're seeing that you're not seeing a unified Democratic Party right now, at least in terms of Biden's leadership, uh, and uh, whether or not that complicates the midterms
Yeah.
remains to be
Well,
seen. But but Biden has to make a decision whether, I mean, Biden is all indication that he wants to run again. He's saying he's going to run again, so on and so forth. But clearly, everybody believes it or thinks that he is unstoppable as a nominee. Uh, and so it would not be surprising to me to see people throw their hats in the ring
yeah.
very quickly after the midterm election, uh, because they're not
Yeah.
necessarily intimidated by him.
I think they should. 350 million people in this country. I think we can do better than Joe Biden versus Donald Trump again. I just do. And aside from the fact that we could do better than them, we could do better. Like, why do we need to have two 80-year-old guys? You know. So anyway, um, you know, I think I have the sense, Bill, that progressives are sort of laying the predicate here that the reason, this is me extrapolating, but I feel like they're sort of arguing the reason Biden is in such trouble, the reason he's in 30% approval rating or whatever, right, is because he wasn't enough of a fighter and because he wasn't progressive enough. And I think that this is really laying, it's a narrative that's based on, that I don't think is based on the truth. Like, I don't think that's why. I understand why they would want him. And by the way, read Dana Milbank's column. Joe Biden has said all the things they want him to say. It's just that nobody believes him. Nobody's afraid of him. He doesn't do it well. He doesn't do anger well. He's not a great communicator. I think we know this. But he said outrageous, illiberal, radical things, in my opinion, including calling everything in the world Jim Crow 2.0, including calling telling African Americans in the past that Mitt Romney wants to put them back in chains. I mean, this is not a shrinking violet. But Biden, I think, is just out of touch with the zeitgeist, and that's the real problem. But I do think that they're trying to set a narrative that says Biden's unpopularity was because he wasn't tough enough, because he wasn't liberal or progressive enough. And I don't think that's true, because I think that the Afghanistan withdrawal obviously started a year ago, started this. And then I think his biggest problems are clearly inflation. And I think that if he had been more progressive, inflation would be worse if he had spent more money. So, like, to me, but do you have a sense or is this me being paranoid?
Well, I don't think it's paranoia on your part. There's just two different schools of thought about why Biden's in the predicament that he's in. And to be more charitable to the progressive anti-Biden argument, and I don't want to, I'm not suggesting that every progressive is anti-Biden, but the extent that that criticism is out there. That argument is that Biden didn't deliver enough tangible progress and economic help to the average American, and they don't accept the argument that the rescue plan triggered the inflation that they're so mad about. They point to Manchin and Sinema holding up Build Back Better. Now, and that's not something they blame Biden for, that particularly, but they want to see Biden stretch the bounds of what he can do with executive power in lieu of that.
Yeah.
For example, canceling student debt, uh, and when it comes to abortion, they're again saying, "Hey, don't be hamstrung by the fact that Manchin and Sinema won't abolish the filibuster and codify Roe. You should put the abortion clinics on federal lands. You should stick your neck out in that way." And there's always something that the left flank of the party wants to push the outer bound on. And some of those things Biden has acceded to. Biden is saying, I would carve out the filibuster to codify Roe as well as for voting rights. These are positions that he did not take 1 year ago, 2 years ago. And it's
Right.
because of that pressure from the left.
When he ran promising to
when
be a centrist and to restore norms and institutions and
Right.
work across the aisle, and then he gets elected.
He's going to violate the spirit of bipartisanship in 2020. So he's gone part of the way to what the norm-busting Democrats want him to do, but he can't go all the way. So you say, Dana Milbank says he said everything. He hasn't quite said everything. He doesn't say, for example, I'm going to put the abortion clinic on federal land, and I don't care what the Hyde Amendment says. I'm going to interpret the Hyde Amendment differently. And if the Supreme Court doesn't agree with me, then I'm going to demand that we expand the court. Like, that's how far other Democrats want to take it, and Biden won't go that far.
Yeah, but you know what? There was a primary election, and Elizabeth Warren didn't win, and Bernie Sanders didn't win, and Joe Biden won, and then he ran for president, and he won the presidency by basically, I think the mandate was don't be Donald Trump, restore norms and institutions. And remember, the Biden coalition was actually a lot of sort of moderate. He needed former Trump voters, to pull this off. I mean, so the idea, the premise that his problem, and again, the question is, like, if what progressives are saying is we are left wingers, ergo we want the Democratic president, to be more progressive because that's what we want. I can understand that. Of course, you're progressive. You want him to be more progressive. That makes sense. But if you start to suggest the reason his presidency, and this is where I'm taking a step, and maybe you'd accuse me of stealing a base here, but if you start to suggest the reason that Biden is losing is probably going to be a one-term president, is because he wasn't a fighter enough and he wasn't progressive enough. Well, I think that was never his mandate. That was never why he won. He didn't win based on the promise that he would be ultra progressive or ultra, left. And B, if you establish the false narrative, then you're bound to make mistakes down the line, right?
Well, I think even AOC at this point would acknowledge that the way Biden ran in 2020 was a smart way to run. And if you push them, they might even say, okay, he didn't have a mandate to do those sorts of things. But they still believe, and I don't think ridiculously, that you get judged on results. The average voter doesn't care about procedure. They don't care about the number of Supreme Court justices. They just want the results. So you should just do whatever it takes. Don't let any norm, any rule, any law stand in your way. Just do it. And
That's what Trump
uh,
wanted to do.
well,
So so now it
they're
becomes
jealous of that. That their argument is Republicans do it. Republicans don't let these things stop them. Uh, and even if they lose an election because of it, they still win the broader fight. They did everything possible to take over the Supreme Court. And even though Trump lost re-election, they got a Roe v. Wade overturned. So that's why you fight, 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 literally in every possible way to deliver. And that's the important thing. And whereas Biden has his limit, again, and me, Matt, I'm not the norm buster here. I'm just trying to properly capture the argument. I think Biden is internally conflicted. I think he does have a certain sense of where the average voter is, which is just do something to make my life better. Like he knows that not everyone's all caught up in Beltway speak and Washington battles. But he also has been around the Senate Judiciary Committee long enough, has been through enough Supreme Court nomination battles to know that the judiciary is an important thing to maintain. He doesn't want to be the guy that makes the independent judiciary that the founders designed collapse on his watch. So he doesn't want to take things that far.
yeah.
And so he's stuck. And he can't spell that out. He can't, or at least he feels that he can't make that plain. So he does certain performative things. Let's abolish the filibuster for this purpose. And skirts the court packing question for the most part. And that's frustrating to a left that has a more holistic narrative of what they want to do that Biden isn't quite meeting.
No, I think that's right. I think that part of his problem is we can sense that he's torn and he's not confident. I would like him to be confident in defending norms and institutions. I would like him to be tough and strong in a different way and standing up. And by the way, that's what real courage is, right? I mean, it takes a lot of courage to stand up to your own team. Probably more courage than standing up to the other team. I have found personally in my life, standing up to your own team, to your own tribe, takes a lot of courage. That I would like to see the Sister Souljah moment. I want him to be tough, but I want to be tough in defense of liberal democracy and institutions and all that stuff. But you're right. I think he has sort of wavered back and forth, and I think that looks weak. But I still go back to it. I mean, Biden's fundamental problems began when he thought for a minute that he could be the next FDR and the next LBJ. It's not because he thought he was going to be a centrist. That didn't get him in trouble. I would argue that that premise that he was going to be this transformational progressive president, that sort of delusion is what got him in, sort of laid the groundwork for almost all the mistakes and problems that later came. So I think it matters deeply. These narratives matter because if Biden's presidency does become a cautionary tale and a failure, the story that we tell about what went wrong is going to affect the future, what the next president acts like or does, and the assumptions that the next Democrat makes. And if they're basing it off of this, I would say, invented story about what went wrong with this presidency, then they're going to make mistakes and do stupid things as well.
Yeah, there's always going to be a battle as to why someone lost. And I mean, and we've talked about this before. I've written about this. I think the Democrats told themselves an incorrect narrative about the Obama presidency. I mean, a guy who won, by the way, a guy who won re-election. And because a flawed narrative became accepted, it influenced Biden's legislative strategy, I think, for the worse. If I'm a Republican, right, I would look at the Trump presidency and say, this is not a successful presidency. They got almost no legislation passed. He was never popular. He lost the House in 2 years and lost the Senate and the presidency in 4 years. But these same folks might tell themselves, well, at least he got the court. At least he overturned Roe v. Wade. He did what he had to do this thing that I really wanted. So perhaps that's reason to emulate that model. And what we can't judge right now is how well that success is going to look in 4, 8, 12 years' time. I think there's a huge possibility
Yeah.
of backlash to that because you still, and if I may plug something that I did today, I have a piece up at the Washington
No,
Monthly about
I
how
think it's really unseemly when you do that, but I'll permit it.
I think I might have touched upon this earlier in a past show. The real uh, plot point in the court's trajectory on Roe, in my opinion, is not so much the Merrick Garland blockade, which is not irrelevant, of course, but the conservative revolt against Harriet Miers, the Bush nominee in 2005, which made Myers withdraw and led to the nomination of Sam Alito. Now, the guy literally wrote the Dobbs opinion, but someone who proved that you could nominate someone with a conservative paper trail, get that person nominated without losing Republican senators, without losing support in the polls, uh, uh, and that I think contributed to Mitch McConnell's conclusion: I can block Merrick Garland and not pay a price for this. Uh, so that strategy worked. That's to be ideologically relentless in finding judges who are going to overturn Roe v. Wade, finding every opportunity to push that argument to the point where Donald Trump literally says publicly as a candidate, I will put judges on the court who will overturn Roe v. Wade, and wins the election. Seemingly an argument to do things like that, to just put it out there, to not trim your sails. However, what I think the actual lesson is that there's a good contingent of swing voters that doesn't care about judicial politics in the moment. And so you can do things that play to the base and get away with it, but you're not bringing the public along while you are doing it. The public is not committed to overturning Roe v. Wade, far from it. And so now I've seen, I don't know if you know Tim Carney, of course, Matt. Tim Carney at the Washington Examiner, he put out an article saying, hey, and I think other conservatives have said similar things that he has sort of laid out the most explicitly. Don't look at polls saying that people didn't want to overturn Roe, because when you ask them about a 6-week ban or a 15-week ban, they're more supportive. They just don't understand what overturning Roe actually does. So this is not going to lead to the backlash that you think it's going to. And my counter to that is look at the polls in Texas, look at the polls in Georgia, look at the polls in Florida, where they passed 15-week and 6-week bans, and the voters in those states don't like those laws. So what I think it can be complicated here is I think people can be a little pregnancy illiterate. They don't necessarily know at the top of their mind like what 6 weeks or 15 weeks even means in terms of where things are. And of course, these are things that are debated. I mean, the scientists say this, the conservatives say that. So it gets all kind of murky. The real question is what's happening in your state where these bills actually pass and they're being actively debated, in real time. I don't see evidence of public support of those kinds of bans in the purple states. So I would, if I'm a Republican, I would worry that we have not successfully brought the public along with us, even though we won the insider game, but we haven't won the outsider game as of yet. Now, whether it's still certainly possible that abortion doesn't rise to that level of prominence that it becomes a voting issue for enough swing voters. So that the jury's out on that. But I would have at least a twinge of nervousness that we've gotten over our skis. We won before we won the public opinion debate.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting. And like I said, I interviewed Simon Rosenberg for my podcast, who is much more bullish on Democrats' chances in the midterms, primarily because he believes that there is a huge anti-MAGA sentiment that is not appreciated fully. But he also cites Roe and shootings, by the way, and these mass shootings and Roe as other factors. So it will be interesting to see. Bill, I got to leave and have lunch with Mom, who, by the way,
Oh,
did not vote in the Pennsylvania primary at all.
is that right? We learned. So
I learned.
she didn't have a favorite. She didn't have a favorite horse.
She just forgot. I'll ask her who she wanted to vote for, but it wasn't that important, so she didn't vote. I'm having lunch with her. I got to leave for that. But anything else you want to plug or mention?
Well, check out my piece in the monthly. I got a piece in Real Clear Politics that the filibuster's on a slippery slope because of what Biden has said on the subject. So I would check that piece out. So you have to ask Mom, is she Oz or Fetterman?
Yes, I will.
Or if she doesn't care and doesn't plan to vote. I'm curious. I'm curious about the Pennsylvania state legislative races. I would like to know what district she's in, and she's in a toss-up district. And her feelings on the governor's race.
I will ask. All right, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully, I'll come back with a report on that. And if it's not too late to patronize us. Don't patronize me, Bill. Yes, do patronize me.
Patreon me.
You can patronize me at patreon.com/Matt Lewis, at patreon.com/Bill Scher, Scher. And you'll be invited to this Zoom conversation with David Fromm, who's always entertaining and interesting and insightful. And I'm hoping to do another one, at least, Bill, between now and the midterms. So patronize us. And we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week.
All right. Take care.